For this presentation, we're going to take a look at the characteristics that all living things share. One of the key aspects of understanding biology is knowing how scientists classify things into living and non-living. And it's actually a more complicated process than you may realize. There are generally accepted to be 5 characteristics that all living things share. The ability to reproduce, the ability to adapt to your environment, the ability to grow and develop, the ability to obtain and use energy, and all living things are made of cells. To be alive, you have to have all 5 of these characteristics. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a brief look at each of these characteristics in turn, touch upon a few details. First, we're going to talk about reproduction. Reproduction, obviously, is an organism creating offspring. All right? It's actually making new, not versions of itself, well, some of them are, but it's creating another generation of its species that contain its genetic material. Some organisms reproduce sexually. That means they have a male and a female, and they combine their genes to create an offspring that is something new. And some organisms reproduce asexually. And when they do that, they create clones, which are identical copies. Reproduction is a key aspect of all life because without it, you can't have new life. All life comes from other life. Next on our list of characteristics of living things is the ability to adapt to your environment. Now, the obvious thing when we hear the word adapt is to think about adaptation and evolution, and that is adapting to your environment. But that's a very long form, adapting to your environment. It's the kind of thing that an entire species does, and it does it over centuries or millennia. There is also a short form of adapting to your environment, something known as homeostasis. And homeostasis is the idea that all living organisms have to maintain a stable internal environment. Living organisms, whether they be the simplest single-celled pond amoeba or a complicated human being, have certain chemical processes that must occur inside of them to work. And so when homeostasis is maintained, it's making sure that the environment is right so that those chemical processes can happen. A couple of good examples are temperature. We all know the human body maintains a temperature of 98.6 degrees. That temperature is maintained even if it's 100 degrees out, or even if it's 40 degrees out. And that maintaining that temperature and what's needed to do that is an example of homeostasis. Another example is maintaining an appropriate pH. pH is just a way we measure whether a liquid is acidic or not. And different organisms will require a different pH. And in fact, some complex organisms, human beings included, have different pHs in different parts of their body. And again, maintaining that, something we'll discuss in detail later on, but maintaining that is an example of homeostasis. It's making sure that the internal environment of an organism is appropriate for its chemical reactions. Next up is the ability of all living things to grow and develop. Obviously, we're all familiar with the idea that when you have children, children are smaller than adults. All right. So as children of any organism grow into adults, they get bigger. So that means that they get more cells. But the other aspect of grow and develop is the idea that organisms can change. A couple of examples of this. Human beings and other mammals, as well as many non-mammals, enter a stage of puberty. And that puberty is a time when the body physically and chemically changes from a child to an adult and allows for reproduction to be possible at that stage. Other organisms undergo a process known as metamorphosis. A lot of insects go from a larva to a pupa to an adult stage. Frogs start off as tadpoles. We all know about how caterpillars undergo a metamorphosis into a butterfly. Those are all examples of organisms developing through the course of their life. Even the smallest single-celled organisms do grow and develop. They just do it on a much smaller scale because they are smaller. Next up on our characteristics of life tour, we have the ability to obtain and use energy. You know you need to get energy because periodically throughout any given day you're hungry. So you need to eat because your body requires energy. That makes you what's known as a heterotroph, where you get your energy from other living things. There are other organisms, known as autotrophs, who actually get their energy from non-living sources. Number one example is usually the sun. We know plants and some types of algae actually generate energy from sunlight in a process known as photosynthesis. And there are also other examples of autotrophs. They're very rare ancient bacteria known as extremophiles that actually live in areas of the world that would be inhospitable to anything else, such as on hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. And they actually get their energy from the heat on those vents. So all living things must obtain and use energy. Some of them need to eat other living things. We call those heterotrophs. Others are able to extract energy from non-living stuff, like hydrothermal vents or the sun, and we call those autotrophs. The final characteristic of life is actually something known as the cell theory. See, one of the key and most fundamental aspects of all living things is that all living things are made of cells. All living cells come from other cells, and cells are the structural and functional unit of life. So you have to be very clear on this. If you are alive, you are made of cells. Okay? There's no argument, there's no discussion. All cells come from other cells. So if you're a living thing, you need to make new cells, you have to use your old cells to do it. If you're a living thing and you want to reproduce, like we talked about up here, whether it be sexually or asexually, you're going to get the cells required for the new organism from your cells. And the final thing is that cells are the structural and functional unit of life. Any part of an organism that's involved in reproduction, it is that organism's cells that are allowing that to happen. Any part of an organism that is an adaptation to an environment, or any part of an organism that is helping it maintain homeostasis, it's because of their cells that are allowing them to do that. Organisms grow and develop. They grow, it's because they get new cells. They get more cells. They develop, it's because their cells change, or their cells start doing different jobs. It's always the cells. You need to obtain and use energy. For instance, when you eat, you have cells in your stomach, you have cells in your mouth, you have cells in your intestines, all of which are allowing you to do the obtaining energy aspect of a living thing. Most fundamental thing about all living things is that they are made of cells, and everything in a living organism that does a job is because of the cells. So again, I want to remind you, we have 5 characteristics of life: reproduction, adaptation to the environment, growth and development, the ability to obtain and use energy, and being made of cells. If you have all 5, you are alive. If you do not, if you are missing even one, you are not a living thing. All right. Thank you very much.